continue to talk about selections and how we can refine them. As we saw already, all of our selection tools have these various modes up here, which allow us to make a selection and then by going up to the Add To mode, for example, add to our selection, go to the Subtraction mode, and decrease from our selection. So often making selections is a three-step process. You may make your selection and then need to add to it or take away from it. But there are a couple more things that we can do to selections. I'm going to do Control D to get rid of this. When you're looking at your selection tools, you may have noticed some fields up here in the options bar. The feather field, and there's also a button for Refine Edge. And maybe you've already explored these, and that would be great. I'm going to explain what feathers are in detail in this video and also in the following videos. So up until now, I'm going to take my polygonal lasso tool and make a selection of the Southern Nights side. When we've been making selections, we have been copying right up to the edge of my selection. I'm going to do Control J, and I'm going to turn off my background so you can see the selection. As you can see, so my selection copied right up to the edge, and that gives me a hard edge. And that might be fine sometimes. But sometimes you want to have a slightly softer edge, or perhaps you want to smooth that edge and help refine it a little bit. And you're especially going to want that for your Create Something New project, where the goal is going to be to make selections from several different images and to combine them into one new image. So you're going to want to be able to refine your selections. So I'm going to do a demonstration of what feathers do. Sticking with my polygonal. This time I'm going to go up to the options bar, and where it says feather, I'm going to put in a feather of 10 and make that same selection. So I'm going to trace the Southern Nights sign again, and you have this image as well if you want to follow along. I do need to make sure I'm on my layer, my background layer, or the one that's called layer 0, or else I'll get that error message about my pixels, about there not being an area to copy and paste. So I'm going to do Control J and take the Move tool and move this one out. Actually, I have two of them there now. And I'm going to go back to my Layers panel, take my polygonal, and this time I'll move my feather up to 30 and make another selection, the same area of the Southern Nights. So my first selection, the original selection, I did not have a feather. The second selection, I'm going to do Control J and take the Move tool, move this one out. The second one had a feather of 10, and the third one a feather of 30. And I'm going to create a solid color background so we can really see what these selections look like. So here's my first one, and this is what we've been doing. Just a regular selection without a feather. Here's the second one with a feather of 10 pixels. Here's the third one with a feather of 30 pixels. So what the feather does is it's going to take an additional amount of pixels, depending on the amount that you put into the feather, outside of your selection, but it's not going to bring them in with a hard edge like you have with zero feather. It's going to bring them in with a soft gradient or lowering the opacity. But besides taking those additional 10 pixels outside and gradient the opacity out, it also makes a feather up towards the inside of the image. You can really see that in this example over here with the 30. We see we've also lost the contrast in the middle of our image, because although our selection is here, I'm asking Photoshop to make a feather 30 pixels in as well as 30 pixels out. So at this point here, my 30 pixels from my top pretty much matches my 30 pixels from my bottom. So that's why this image looks a lot softer and it loses its contrast. You can see it a little bit as well in this one here with the 10 pixel feather. You can see how it's not just the outside that is being feathered or softened, it's also the inside. So that means that most of the time when you're working with feathers, you're probably going to work in small numbers. This was really just an example using higher numbers so you can really see what it does. The number that you're going to use for your feather does depend on the resolution of your image. This is an image with, let me just go up to image size, with a resolution of 72 and not that many pixels. It's a small image. So a feather of 30 on this image is huge because it doesn't even have that many pixels. But if you are working on an image that's, let's say, 4,000 by 5,000 pixels with a resolution of 250, you'll notice that a feather of 30 will be a lot smaller. So already if we think about how many pixels we have per inch, if I have 250 pixels per inch versus 72, you can understand that the feather of 30 is going to look a lot smaller, or will not be as noticeable with an image that has a higher resolution than an image with a lower resolution. So let's just go through the different selection tools and talk about how to make those feathers. I'm going to turn these layers off and go back to my background. There are a couple of different ways that you can make a feather. If you make a feather before your selection, you can take any one of these selection tools, my rectangular marquee or my elliptical, go up to the options bar and put that number in, just as you saw me do before. But I have another option as well. I could make a selection and then right-click on that selection and choose feather. So I can also add the feather after I've made the selection. And I'll add a feather of, say, 25, and do Control J, turn off my background so you can see what this looks like with the ellipse with a feather of 25. So that was added after the fact. And I'll just do the same with the rectangle just to show you. So in the options bar, I have a feather of 0, but if I right-click, I can choose the feather option and I get that window. And I could put in 5 after I've made my selection as well. With the rectangular in particular, as soon as you add the feather, you will notice that your edges become curved. So I'm going to do Control D, and let's take a look at our lasso tools. So same thing with the lasso tool. I can go up to my options bar and put in the feather. Oops, sorry, I'm going to make a little selection here. Or after the fact, I can right-click and choose feather. The same is going to be true for my other two lasso tools. Just make a quick selection. I can also right-click and choose feather. Now, I'm going to do Control D to deselect that. The other two selection tools, the Quick Selection tool and the Magic Wand tool, don't have an option in the options bar for feather. So let's see what happens if I make a selection here of my Southern Nights. I can still right-click on my selection and choose feather. And I can put in whatever number I want. The same is true for the Magic Wand. I'm going to do Control D to get rid of that old one and select Into the Sky. I am on the layer over here, layer 5, that just has the ellipse, so I need to switch over to my background. Control D, and let's do that again. So I'll select parts of the sky. I'm in the Add To mode, and you can see on my Magic Wand, I have a little bit of a plus sign letting me know I'm in the Add To mode. I'm going to increase my tolerance to 50 because I'm really not getting much of the sky. There we go, much better. Getting more of the sky. And same thing, I don't have a field up here for feather, but I can right-click and add feather. It's a little bit lower down, but it's still there. Add feather. And put in whatever number I want. So again, the feather can be very useful for helping you soften the edges of your selection. As you saw with your deconstruction project, when you make a selection without a feather, the edges are very hard, which worked well for that project, but for this next project, you might want to be able to have a softer edge. Okay, so in my next video, I'm going to talk about how you can now refine the edge of your selection even more by smoothing it.